You're doing yourself a favor by forgiving them and not...
The arrest of 19-year-old Mohammed Hamza Khan at O'Hare Airport in October of 2014 rattled the Chicago area Muslim community. FBI investigators say Khan was planning to fly from Chicago to Istanbul to join ISIL after buying 3 airline tickets for himself and his 2 siblings.
Many of the young people, they are really passionate and they are very concerned about what is happening in Syria. They make the wrong choices, going and joining ISIL or other terrorist organizations, which is illegal.
Before leaving, investigators say Khan wrote a 3-page letter to his parents explaining that he could no longer morally justify living in the U.S. I simply cannot sit here and let my brothers and sisters get killed with my own hard-earned money.
And we condemn the brainwashing.
At a court appearance, Khan's mother spoke directly to those she held responsible.
And we have a message for ISIS, Mr. Baghdadi and his fellow social media recruiters. Leave our children alone.
Khan's attorney, Tom Durkin, specializes in cases like this and says law enforcement's attempt to predict future dangerousness gets into murky territory.
The issue is somebody predisposed to commit the crime? That gets very, very difficult when you're talking about young kids. And I think that's part of the reason there's such a perception in the Muslim community that these kids are being entrapped.
In late October, Khan pleaded guilty to attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization. He now faces up to 15 years in federal prison.
I don't think there's any question he was brainwashed. I don't think there's any question he was taken advantage of.
With the rise of ISIL in the Middle East, there has been a renewed effort to counter potential threats on U.S. soil.
I have homegrown violent extremist investigations in every single state.
And there's been a notable increase in ISIL-related arrests. From March 2014 to June 22, 2015, 56 people, mostly men, were charged in U.S. federal court with supporting ISIL. Since March 2015, there has been an increase in cases of individuals accused of plotting attacks in the U.S. in the name of ISIL. One of them was 20-year-old John Booker Jr., charged with attempting to carry out a suicide bombing at the U.S. Army installation at Fort Riley, Kansas. Booker had been on the FBI's radar for more than 6 months, attending prayers here at the Islamic Center of Topeka.
Several months after, he began to come, I got a call from the FBI agent.
Omar Hazin is the center's imam and an Islamic advisor to the Kansas Department of Corrections. He says the FBI asked him to counsel Booker, who they say had posted alarming messages online about waging jihad.
The posting was saying that John indicated that he wanted to become a martyr, he was ready to meet Allah, and that he was ready to join a jihad.
At what point did you realize that he needed more than just spiritual guidance?
Well, I think after maybe 2 or 3 weeks after we began to talk, so he told me he had been on medication. Then I had discussed with the FBI agent to see if we could try to get him, if they could try to get him help along with the Islamic Center working mental health help.
In an unclassified FBI report, investigators say Booker checked himself into a mental health facility and noted that he did not have access to a vehicle or possess firearms. Despite Booker's documented history of mental illness, 8 months later, federal investigators say an FBI informant told Booker he had a cousin who could get people overseas and asked Booker what he wanted to do. Booker answered, anything you think is good, I will follow you. The informant then told Booker that if he said he was ready to fight, he would have to prove it. Booker responded, I will kill any kuffar, non-believer. I will follow any place. He was provided with what he thought was an explosive-filled van.
Federal investigators say Booker drove the van to what he believed to be a little-used utility gate that would allow him to enter Fort Riley undetected. They say once on base, Booker planned to detonate the explosive device to kill as many soldiers as possible.
The bomb was a fake. Booker was arrested and now faces life in prison.
FBI agents and Joint Terrorism Task Force officers in Minnesota and California arrested 6 men.
But the investigation fits a pattern of cases.
Concerned that social media is pulling in young people and recruiting them, and this
often paraded out by authorities that rely heavily on sting operations.
He espoused violent jihad, and that he did constitute a threat to those of us in the United States.
The FBI in Kansas would not comment on the ongoing John Booker Jr. investigation.
if somebody's expressing ideas that the government thinks are troubling, they feel it's appropriate for the government then to come in and push them along.
Mike German spent 16 years with the FBI, specializing in undercover work and domestic terrorism. He is critical of the sting tactics.
Because there are real bad people out there. And, half of the violent crime in this country goes unsolved, including a third of the murders and 60% of the rapes. For the government to spend the kind of resources that are necessary for an undercover sting operation distracts from those real cases.
The FBI did not grant Al Jazeera's requests for an interview with FBI Director James Comey, but in response to criticisms last year, he wrote, "Every undercover operation involves deception, which has long been a critical tool in fighting crime. The FBI's use of such techniques is subject to close oversight, both internally and by the courts that review our work." We asked leaders here in Chicago what law enforcement should do instead.
We have asked them, look, if you find somebody on the path to radicalization, what do you do about them? Well, you encourage them to commit a crime and then catch them. Why don't you have a program of rehabilitation for them? Rather than letting them continue the radicalization path, pull them back.
In the absence of those measures, there is concern in the American Muslim community that those vulnerable to online ISIL predators may choose the wrong path. Usher Qureshi, Al Jazeera, Fort Riley, Kansas.